Deep beneath the sun-drenched stones of ancient Crete, a heartbeat echoes through the darkness. Not a human heart, but something older, heavier, and far more dangerous. For centuries, we have been told the story of a monster trapped in a maze, a beast that hungered for human flesh. But what if the labyrinth was never a prison? What if it was actually a palace? And what if the monster at its center was never a monster at all, but a reflection of a civilization we are only just beginning to understand? 3,500 years ago, the island of Crete was the center of the known world. While the rest of Europe was still in the shadows of the Bronze Age, a people we now call the Minoans were building the first great maritime empire. They were masters of the sea, wealthy traders who lived in sprawling, unfortified cities, seemingly unafraid of invasion. At the heart of this empire sat King Minos, a figure of absolute power and terrifying legend. According to the stories, Minos ruled with an iron fist from his capital at Knossos. But his power came with a heavy price. The gods had cursed his bloodline, and his wife, Pasiphae, gave birth to a creature so hideous it could not be allowed to live in the light of day. A creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull, the Minotaur. To hide this shame and satisfy the beast's hunger, Minos commanded his master craftsman, Daedalus, to build the labyrinth, a structure of such complexity that no one who entered could ever find their way out. And every 9 years, the city of Athens, defeated in war, was forced to send a grim tribute, 7 young men and 7 young women, destined to wander the dark until they met the horns of the beast. Among one such tribute was Theseus, the prince of Athens. He didn't come to Crete to die, he came to end the cycle of blood. When the Athenian ship arrived at the harbor of Knossos, the tributes were paraded before the royal court. It was here that Theseus caught the eye of Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos. Love, or perhaps a desire to escape her father's shadow, drove Ariadne to betrayal. She sought the help of Daedalus, the labyrinth's creator, who whispered the secret of the maze: the way out is to never lose your connection to the entrance. Ariadne gave Theseus a simple ball of red silk thread. She told him to tie one end to the doorframe and unravel it as he descended into the dark. Theseus entered the labyrinth alone. The air grew thick with the smell of damp earth and old bones. The path twisted and turned, doubling back on itself, a physical manifestation of confusion. He walked for hours, the silence broken only by the distant, guttural roar of something that sounded like a storm trapped in a cave. Finally, in the pitch-black heart of the maze, he found it. The battle was not a clash of armies, but a desperate struggle in the dark. Theseus, guided by the desperate hope of his people, managed to overpower the Minotaur. Using his bare hands or his sword, depending on which version of the legend you believe, he slew the beast. Following the red thread back through the twisting corridors, he emerged into the sunlight, a hero who had broken the power of Crete. He fled the island with Ariadne, leaving the dead monster in the ruins of the maze. The myth tells us of a literal monster, a hybrid of man and beast, born of divine punishment and hidden in a magical maze. For the ancient Greeks of the classical period, this story served a purpose. It painted the Minoans as the other, a strange, cruel, and alien people whose time had passed, and it established Athens as the new rising power of the Mediterranean. The Minotaur was the personification of a foreign empire's tyranny, a nightmare that had to be conquered for civilization to move forward. But what does the evidence say? In 1900, archaeologist Arthur Evans began excavating the site of Knossos. What he found wasn't just a building, it was a revelation. The Palace of Knossos covers over 20,000 square meters. It contains over 1,300 rooms connected by a bewildering network of corridors, light wells, and staircases. To a visiting mainland Greek, used to simple, rectangular dwellings, this sprawling, chaotic complex would have felt exactly like a labyrinth. In fact, the word labyrinth likely comes from the Minoan word labris, meaning double-headed axe. The palace walls are covered in carvings of these axes. The house of the double axe was literally the labyrinth. And what of the Minotaur? The Minoans didn't just have stories about bulls, they were obsessed with them. Their most famous ritual was bull leaping. Young men and women would literally sprint toward a charging bull, grab its horns, and somersault over its back. This was no mere sport, it was a sacred, dangerous rite of passage. Archaeologists have found no evidence of a half-man, half-bull creature, but they have found something else: masks. Ritual stone masks in the shape of bull heads, worn by priests during ceremonies. Imagine a terrified captive, brought from a distant land, thrust into the dark, winding basement of this confusing palace, only to be confronted by a high priest wearing a massive, bloody bull mask in the flickering torchlight. To that captive, the legend would have been very real. The sacrifice might not have been a meal for a monster, but a ritualized execution or a deadly game in a culture that worshipped the power of the bull. Why does the story of the Minotaur still matter? It remains one of our most potent symbols of the other, the parts of ourselves or our enemies that we find monstrous and try to lock away in the dark. It represents the psychological maze of the human mind, the feeling of being lost in a world that doesn't make sense. But historically, the legacy of the Minotaur is a reminder of how we rewrite the past. The Greeks took a sophisticated, peaceful, and artistic civilization, the Minoans, and turned their sacred rituals into a horror story. They transformed a palace of light into a prison of darkness. The Minotaur is the shadow cast by a fallen empire, a story told by the victors to justify their rise to power. The reign of the bull kings of Crete didn't end with a hero's sword. It ended with fire and water. Around 1600 BC, the nearby volcanic island of Thera erupted with the force of several hundred atomic bombs. The resulting tsunamis battered the Cretan coast, and the falling ash choked their crops. The Minoan civilization, weakened by nature, was eventually conquered by the very mainland Greeks who would go on to tell the tale of Theseus. The labyrinth was real, but it was a masterpiece of architecture, not a death trap. The Minotaur was real, but he was likely a man in a mask, performing a ritual he believed kept the world in balance. When we strip away the myth, we find a story that is less about monsters and more about the inevitable cycle of history, how one culture's sacred truth becomes the next culture's terrifying legend. History is a thread. Sometimes it leads us to the truth, and sometimes it leads us deeper into the maze. If you want to join us as we follow that thread to uncover the truth behind history's greatest mysteries, please subscribe and turn on notifications. In our next episode, we journey north to witness the end of the world, Ragnarok, and the real-world volcanic winter that inspired the Viking apocalypse. Thank you for watching.